Hello and welcome to Just Onside. Hope you've had a fantastic weekend. I've certainly had a great weekend. I'm not sure about the man on the screen who's with me. So, OS, how was your weekend?
It's not often a you that you get a lot of talking points. We weren't spoiled for choice in terms of subjects today. I'm just thinking we can either talk about the amazing driving of Max Verstappen yesterday in Brazil, that Grand Prix. I mean, that was incredible. Seal the championship most likely. We've got
No,
Jake Paul.
it's a football podcast, so
True, but
no Formula One.
we've got other options. We've got Jake Paul against Mike Tyson live on Netflix in a couple of weeks. I'm sure
Too
that's
violent for my liking. Let's stick to football.
fair enough. And of course, if you want to go slightly off topic, another subject near and dear to your heart, are you? We've got the US presidential elections in a few days as well.
That is actually, yeah, that would be, but I think we'll save it for another day.
No, I
Let's talk
suggest.
about what happened at the weekend.
Oh, do we have to?
A really interesting weekend. I mean, it was it was a real surprise. I must confess there was a couple of surprising results, and one of them obviously was the Arsenal. It was never going to be easy, but I certainly didn't expect Arsenal were going to lose the game. So let's start off with your beloved Arsenal. Uh, a bit of a shock, and I've said it before. I think first time I said it as a joke, but I think I'm being serious here now. Have the wheels come off?
Have the wheels come off? I was really hoping you'd take me up on the Trump v. Harris presidential election, but clearly you weren't. You didn't bite. Yeah, look, have the wheels come off? It's a good question. It's a good question, but perhaps a tad premature. Look, let's talk small picture and then maybe go on to the larger picture. First and foremost, I think it was Jeffrey Boycott who coined the phrase when I think one of the batsmen got out for zero that he was lucky to get naught. And really, I thought Arsenal were lucky to get zero. They deserve nothing from that game. Absolutely nothing. They were second best in every aspect of the game. And it just goes to show that when you're scratching around for confidence, which they have been, Ayub, especially in terms of performances, that when you come up against a well-oiled team, and Newcastle have been struggling in the league recently. I think this was their first win in six in the Premier League. But even so, I think going to St James's is a difficult game. They do have Arsenal's number to some extent in some of the games, as in the games have been fairly challenging, at least at St James's, as you'd expect. They're a good team. But yeah, they were second best. Newcastle were better in every regard. They didn't create a whole bunch of opportunities, Newcastle. But Arsenal created next to nothing. So, from my perspective, results wise, no complaints. Performance merited nothing from an Arsenal perspective. Just very quickly, I thought Newcastle, again, credit to them, played well, did the things you have to do against Arsenal, which is defend in numbers, make it supremely difficult to pass through. Yes, they don't have their conductor in chief, but that's no real excuse for not playing progressive football and trying to create opportunities, which they struggle to do very simply. And Newcastle, I thought, especially the wingers tucked in, always making sure Saka had two or three bodies in front of him at any one time, which is what you have to do given his current form and class. But clearly, Arsenal, I thought, in terms of the way you should be going about trying to break a team down, they pretty much did the exact opposite, playing very much as individuals, wingers running into cul-de-sacs, no real support as they normally would have in terms of fullback, in terms of central midfield. No real patterns, no give and goes, no dynamic movement, no motions. One challenge that Arsenal have is I feel like they're one of the more secure teams, similar to Man City in terms of when they are leading or even drawing to some extent. They're generally very secure in terms of ball possession. The challenge they have is when they're trailing, or perhaps even when the game's a bit of a stalemate, without Martin Odegaard, they don't have the ability to be, or they don't have the confidence, let's say, to play through the thirds with any real dynamism. It's very pedestrian. It's very much pass to feet. It's very much kind of go around the houses. But again, very little intent in the way they play right now. And what I mean by intent is I'm talking running off the ball, forcing overlaps, underlaps, turning the opposition around, facing their own back line and their own goal. So Newcastle had pretty much everything in front of them and had it very slow in front of them, which is meat and potatoes actually for a Premier League team nowadays. So yeah, very much. I don't think they deserve anything. I think some of that is down to confidence. I think they're scratching around for confidence. They've not had too many great performances this year, and we're now in early November. You can think about they just about got past Leicester. They just about got past Southampton. They got turned over by Bournemouth. And yes, they've had to chop and change you. There's no two ways about it. They've had it difficult. They would argue they've had it a little bit tough, especially with some questionable decisions, or at least 50-50 ones that have gone against them. And it just goes to show that when you take out an elite level ball player, what can happen? Now, look, they're not Man City. Man City, and we'll come on to them. They struggled this weekend as well, but they've coped with the absence of De Bruyne and Foden in previous times because they've got an incredible squad. They're all playing a very similar way. But I think when you take out Odegaard, it just goes to show Arsenal look pretty ordinary, to be honest with you. You'd expect a lot more. So, small picture, I think, in terms of the game itself, they deserve nothing, they got nothing. So, I think it was an absolutely fair result. I would argue it was the worst performance under Mikel Arteta in the last 2.5 years. So, there's definitely something there where they need a reaction. In terms of larger picture, I mean, we'll come on to the other games that you. No, I don't think it's done and dusted. I do think still you've got to be calm and you've got to be measured. Sport at its highest, in my opinion, and I'm not just talking about football, there are always difficult moments, difficult blips. Arsenal have had those in the last couple of years and yet still run Man City close. Do I think they're using up their margin for error at a quick rate of knots? Yes, absolutely, I do. But I do think, look, let's be calm and measured about this. I do still think the manager's earned the right. I mean, for me, there's zero issues with the manager in terms of questioning his, not just his position, but his credibility and what have you. In my personal humble opinion, he's way past that. But I think the team also has probably done enough to be given the opportunity to turn this around. And that's what sport is at the highest level. There's difficult moments, there's difficult runs. You're not going to win every game. However, what you do have to show is the ability to kind of bounce back, and they'll have to go on a run. What they're you? They've got another difficult game at the weekend, so it's getting close to that last chance saloon, if you wish, in terms of being able to challenge for the title. This much I would agree with. I still don't think they've been cut adrift. Do I think they need to go on a bit of a run? Absolutely. I think talk of the title perhaps now is a little bit. Let's just say I don't think their performances are good enough for you. Just finally, I think it's a little perhaps missing the boat to start continuing to talk about the Premier League title. I don't think Arsenal have done enough this season to warrant that type of perhaps kind of discussion. I think they need to show that they can get back on and play some good quality football, which we know they're capable of, and we know they can go on a run. However, this is a big test for them relatively early in the season. They're not playing well. They need to turn that around. Another difficult game in the Champions League to come away to Inter Milan, then away to Chelsea. But I do think even though they're not playing well, and I thought they deserve nothing out of the game, I'm not yet ready to concede that they've got no chance with the Premier League title. I still think they can put a run together in terms of consistency of performance. That's what I talk about, and still have some say in the destination of the Premier League title. Time will tell, but I do think the manager and even the players have earned the right to have that opportunity.
I mean, you've talked about a number of reasons why they're struggling. They've obviously not got Odegaard, and you're absolutely right. He's a world-class player. Uh, you've also talked about low on confidence. So you've talked about a number of reasons why they're struggling, which then begs the question, what makes you think they're going to go on the run? Because there's so many elements at the moment which are going against them. And this is sometimes I always look at these moments to see the real true quality of the coach. And I sort of think he's been found wanting because you've just alluded to the point that this is probably one of the worst games that the Arsenal have played in 2.5 years. And if in isolation it would be okay, you could almost sort of say, all right, they've had a good run and they've had a bad performance. But this is on the back of sort of quite ordinary performances. So this seems to me a point of concern that they're not really playing well. And the last game has probably been one of the worst games. So it can't be viewed in isolation. It has to be viewed in I suppose the last 3 or 4 weeks. So to me, I would be, if I was an Arsenal fan, very concerned. You've got a very tough game against quite an impressive Chelsea. Uh, you've got in the middle of this, you've got a Champions League game as well. So I think at the moment there's a lot of challenges. And I just don't think at the moment Arteta is providing the answer to the challenges. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Look, I think it's legitimate to ask the question because ultimately he's made some decisions recently, which I believe he has the right to make. I genuinely don't think we get the right to question it because there have been some unprecedented set of circumstances with not just the players that have been out of you, but also players having limited time in training that we don't even know about. Ben White's had this already two or three times this season. Timber, that's obviously happened a few times. Calafiori, players returning from a couple of international breaks. I think we've had two already. Correct me if I'm mistaken. So there's a lot of what I'm saying is a lot of turnover, a lot of movement. Is he available? Is he not available? Short turnarounds, Champions League games to navigate. So there's been a lot of games already. They're obviously making a bit of a run in the EFL Cup. So I would say from an Arteta perspective, it's been incredibly disjointed for the last 2 or 3 months. So it's not been an ideal start, far from it, especially also then suspensions, right? You don't really account for playing with 10 men on more than two, well, it's been three occasions now, also for extended period of time, right, in the games as well. So there's been a lot to deal with. I think he's made some decisions where I wouldn't necessarily question them in terms of them being wrong. I think he's perhaps embarked on the wrong course of action. For example, this week, Partey, who I thought was pretty incredible against Liverpool, kept Diaz very quiet and he was solid
Hmm.
first to the ball in many of his duels, all the rest of it. I was thought that he could have probably just gone with Timber right back, Miles Kelly or Zinchenko left back, although Zinchenko hasn't played much, and to be fair, it showed when he came on. But then put Partey in the middle, right, which where his technical ability can come to the fore a little bit more. So there have been some decisions where he's perhaps embarked on the wrong course of action. I have every faith in Mikel Arteta, I really do. I think he's an incredible coach. I think these are moments that you have to go through and find solutions for and answers for. The only thing I want to say on a more kind of game level, you, but I don't know if you see this as well. The challenge Arsenal have right now is for the last year and a half, and Carragher embarked on it where he spoke about whether Arteta's becoming a bit more Mourinho-esque. And he meant, like I said, he meant it as a compliment. The problem you have is Arsenal play a very, in my opinion, at least without Odegaard, they have a very calm and controlled way of playing, very risk averse, very much pass to feet, very little motion unless it's getting Saka into those one-on-one situations, which he's seeing few and few of because of the quality of the player that he is. Teams again, now that Arsenal have become, I would argue, a Premier team, teams give them respect, which is exactly the additional challenge that you have to overcome, right? Ayub, Manchester United overcame it time and time again under Alex Ferguson. So that is something you have to overcome as an Arsenal, as Arsenal continue to kind of improve. The challenge I see is that they're very calm and very risk averse in terms of their football, which means that unless your defense is firing, which it has in previous years, Ayub, they've had the best defense. I think the eye test tells you that. But this year it's not been the case, has it, Ayub? And when your defense is perhaps not as tight for various reasons that we can go into, you're going to find yourself on the wrong end of some of these kind of 50-50 type games. Whereas previously they were like 1-0 up, we'll keep a clean sheet, it's game over because they arguably had the two best centre backs in the league, arguably. Right now, it's not quite firing. There's been a little bit of movement. And right now, Arsenal, the type of football they play, and again, especially with that Odegaard, it's very risk averse, very little motion. I'm a big fan of playing football in motion. And what I mean by that is there's going to be lots of movement off the ball. You've got to force the other team to make tons and tons of mental decisions throughout the game. Turn them around, one touch, two touch, pop it around the corner. They don't know whether it's coming left, right, which way is it coming. And over time, what happens is the mental fragility of the opposition team will yield itself in a goal or something down the road because they're having to make so many. Right now, Newcastle were like balls in front of us, calm, just jockey across left and right. So unless you're going to start taking a little bit of risk in your offensive football, you're going to find yourself in many games where it's nip and tuck. And unless your defense is firing, where it has previously, perhaps not quite now, you're going to find yourself on the wrong end of some games. Newcastle didn't create a ton. You Raya had very little to do by and large. But again, if you're involved in too many of those type of games, you're going to find yourself on the wrong end of the results. I've got confidence in Arteta. I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt. If you want to question, that's absolutely fine. I think look, you're there to be shot at when you're managing a top team. I've got no qualms about that. But I just think they've just got to get their heads down, get the players back, get a consistency of selection, and focus on keeping clean sheets again. Because I still think there's enough there offensively to create teams problems. Again, I think they just need to hunker down and start building slowly but surely and trying to pick up and put a few good results together. Time will tell, but their margin for error is definitely diminishing.
I think you really made an interesting point. Do you know, sort of based on what Carragher was sort of saying, he's almost become Mourinho-esque. And I don't know whether it's a conscious decision that he's made because he's been quite close the last 2 or 3 seasons. So he's probably looking for that extra few points. How do I get that extra few points? And maybe he's decided, well, look, Mourinho, I mean, we've talked about it before, about the dark arts being a little bit cynical, uh, sort of in game, sort of being a little bit sort of crafty and sort of maybe staying down for that extra period of time. Reyes always wasting time, and these are very very much the traits of a Mourinho team. Because it's not just on the field, but they're also, I mean, we use the phrase many, many times, the dark arts. And it's not something that I would criticize because for me, ultimately it's about winning a game of football whichever way you can, and sometimes if it means just wasting a little bit of time, do it. It's almost as if he's focused. I mean, we talked about, I mean, you talked about the sendings off, and that was something, I think, I mean, I'm not sure, I mean, somebody may provide stats which dispel this myth, but I always thought that Mourinho's team had sort of more sendings off than perhaps other top line teams, and this is almost symptomatic, I think, of something that perhaps Arteta has introduced to the Arsenal, saying, "Well, look, we've been close. It's not been good enough. I need to see something now or do something which gets me an extra 4, 5, 6 points, which perhaps will be crucial when it comes to winning the title." Uh, so I don't know. There seems to be something slightly different with this Arsenal side. I do question a coach who is over reliant on a certain individual, on one player. And Odegaard seems to be, it's something that is quite a common theme now over the last few weeks that Odegaard, we're missing Odegaard, we're missing Odegaard. I mean, obviously, he's probably not said it as much, but you certainly, as an Arsenal fan, have mentioned that. So, is there been a change in his approach, in his style? Is there a change in the mindset? Is this a different animal than from previous seasons? Because at the moment, it doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, look, anytime you take a player like look, if we miss Odegaard for the rest of the season, Arsenal are not finishing top four. It's as simple as that. They're not a top four team. I don't think they're a top six team, to be honest with you. It's also, I think it's not just about one player. I think you shouldn't just equate it to numerical play. It's also what that player brings, right? There's no other player that we have like Odegaard. Yes, there's no other player like Saka. But what I mean is like these players, when they elevate their games into a certain level, there's an inherent, I mean, it happens, let's say, in cricket. I don't want to necessarily say that the two are similar, but let's say you have a champion bowler like a Shane Warne or what have you. You know this. Over time, what happens is the captain's going to become reliant. There's a
Mm.
long, steady partnership. You throw the ball to Shane Warne. Now, Shane Warne also had his trials and tribulations off the pitch, a few injuries, all the rest of it. So the more a player becomes successful, like Shane Warne obviously invariably was, the moment you don't have that player then in your team, it becomes glaring in its omission because you become so reliant on that player. Yes, cricket's a one-on-one sport to some extent in terms of the battle between bat and ball. But what I'm saying is when a player elevates his status within a team, the team also invariably goes through that player, especially in terms of offense. And yes, it goes through Odegaard, everything in terms of ball. The ball will find its way to Martin Odegaard. That's how the team functions. So when he's not there for an extended period of time, especially when you've got no practice of him not being there for an extended period of time, I just think it's a byproduct of that kind of success that all of a sudden the team's now having to organically find its way through and score. And you can do that for a game or two, which Arsenal perhaps navigated. Don't forget, he was missing against Spurs. They won the game. He was missing against Man City. 10 men. They nearly won that game. So it's not about that. But you can't, you know this, you can't do that. You can't overcome an absence like that for an extended period of time, or at least Arsenal can't. So for me, Arteta's not used that as an excuse whatsoever. I will not have that thrown at him. He's actually gone the other way. He said, no, it's time to show our mettle, see what we're about. Now, he's found out that, yeah, we've probably not had enough to get through. Plus, he's had a few other issues in the team. I think when you're missing a gun player like that, you probably want everything else to be settled so you can say, right, guys, we can still do this. The problem is it's been compounded by other errors in terms of players and also players' form. I mean, Saliba spoke about it himself. He's perhaps not at his imperious best. So fair enough. He's more than happy to admit to that. I just think they still have it in them, in my opinion, to hunker down, focus on the basics, work hard as a team, get back to keeping clean sheets. And I still think, even though they've got a lack of form in certain places, like they've probably had to ask too much of Trossard, they probably had to ask too much of Martinelli because Martinelli's struggling for form. suddenly they look a relatively ordinary team. I still think they've got enough, in my opinion, that if you can get back to basics, put a premium on clean sheets. I'm going to say it again, put a premium on clean sheets. They should still find their way through a lot of these games. So time will tell. It's up to the squad, it's up to the players, it's up to the manager to prove that they can do it. Again, another tough game, three away games in a row. Newcastle into Chelsea. Failed the first test. Let's see how the next two go. I would say Chelsea's a bigger game than Inter right now. It'll be interesting to see how they cope at the weekend with another relatively short turnaround. But in my opinion, I think they've done enough over the last couple of years just to deserve the benefit of the doubt and see if they can dig themselves out of this hole.
You are right. It's the significance of the Chelsea game is huge now, so it'll be interesting to see how they perform in that game. Right. We'll talk about another team at the top of the table that lost surprisingly. Man City versus Bournemouth. I mean, Bournemouth aren't mugs, but you'd always think that Man City. I mean, they have a really good record at Bournemouth, so it was certainly a surprise for me. Was it a surprise for you?
Look, it'd be remiss for me to go first in a sense on this one. I know you're a huge fan of the Bournemouth coach, and this is your moment. This is your moment. He could have been donning the side at Leeds. Look, tell us all about it. I mean, I didn't watch the game to be honest with you. I caught some of the highlights. I was watching the Liverpool Brighton game, but what's your thoughts? I imagine you followed the game. I mean, well deserved on the face of it.
It was, yes. I mean, it sort of City could have, in the end, uh, sneaked a point, but that would have been very undeserving. I think Bournemouth were well worth the win. They've got a good coach, they've got a good system, they've got players who are playing at the top of their game. And but I'm going to focus on Guardiola. I mean, Guardiola's already been making noises about the amount of injuries that he's got. His bench was, I mean, this was a bench that I've never seen for City. So he's somebody that I've always said that he's a great coach of great players, but he's not somebody that he's capable of dealing with difficult circumstances, much like perhaps Arteta at this moment in time. Uh, so he's already making his excuses. And this was, I mean, the starting eleven wasn't too bad for City. So there's absolutely no excuse. You can sort of probably say that the strength on the bench wasn't there. But again, I'm Guardiola is showing to me he's a super great coach. Because you have to have the full package. It's great sort of saying, right, I've got a great array of players, I can make them play great football, but you've got to adapt and accommodate when you've got key players missing. Rodri is a huge loss. You talk about Odegaard in a different sort of way. Rodri is just a huge, just as huge a miss for Man City because in a sense he's the glue. You have Rodri. In a sense, I always say that you build the side around Rodri for Man City. You can have all the class players around him, but ultimately, if without Rodri, it's a different Manchester City side. Now, he has to, as a coach, as this great coach with huge amounts of experience, he has to be able to adapt a system that is is playing without Rodri, plus also other players as well. So at the moment, it's a one-off. I mean, you probably could turn around and say it's a one-off, but it was a very disappointing performance. I'm intrigued to find out how he sort of navigates the next few games because Rodri's obviously out for the season. They've not been scintillating Man City, certainly this season. They've not been as dominant as they normally are. I think they are. There's holes in their lineup now. I think they're a side that I think a team like Bournemouth and the way they set up, there are other teams that are going to look at that as a template to think, right, hang on, if we approach this game right, there's a chance that we can nick something. So I'm sort of certainly sort of casting aspersions at Guardiola. This is where he should show his mettle. Show us that you are really a great coach. It's too easy when you've got all the players at your disposal. This is when you can really sort of say how great a coach you are. So for me, he now is in a position again where he needs to really show how good a coach he is. There's weaknesses in that side at this moment in time. There's obviously sort of some players that are missing, a key player that's missing for the whole season. So uh, I I I think that I want to now see how good Guardiola really is because I've always questioned him. I've always said when the going is good, he's great. When the going gets tough, he's found wanting, and I think he's found wanting again.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're being a bit harsh there, you. I mean, but I've heard this with you and Guardiola. I know you're not his favorite fan.
No, I
Look,
love. I know. I absolutely think he's a great coach, but I've always the caveat is always he's a great coach of great players uh, and a great squad. When some of the elements are missing, that's when I have question marks over how good he is.
look, fair. If you wish to go that way, I still think he's the best coach in the business. I, I don't have any qualms about that. Look, ultimately, the same way about Arsenal. You're going to go through some rough moments. I never for one moment thought Manchester City, I should say, were going to go unbeaten this season. And again, I put such a high premium on performances. Ayub, their performances this year have left me thinking this was coming. Now
Mm,
there have been some special circumstances, but I look at some of the games they've played this year. I mean, against Fulham, they conceded lots of chances, conceded 2 goals. Wolves, they needed a last-minute controversial
mm,
winner to come through that. Against Arsenal, they needed a 96th minute equaliser when, and it's not that they didn't look, they penned Arsenal in. Obviously, Arsenal were happy to relinquish the ball, but they really didn't
mm,
create that much. I mean, Arsenal, I thought, defended incredibly well. But other than maybe one lapse with the corner, which led to the goal, I mean, that could have been a defeat. And again, it's more about the fact they didn't really concede, they didn't really create much. So they've had some situations this season. Plus, when Rodri obviously was ruled out for the rest of the season, I thought they're gonna be a little bit more vulnerable. They're gonna be a little bit more open in terms of on the counter attacks. You saw that with Fulham, especially. You saw that with Wolves also looking threatening on the counter attack. Look, they've not been playing that well in terms of what they can do in terms of their peak. I still think with the players they have available, if they're firing, they will fire and they'll probably fire themselves perhaps to the top of the league when all is said and done. The problem they've got is De Bruyne has not played any meaningful minutes. Foden's not played any meaningful minutes in terms of quality of contribution. His season's not got going. Grealish is injured. The worry they have, if I was them, is Haaland obviously missed another sitter, and he's missed a few. It may not look it, but in his time at Manchester City, we forget in amongst all the amazing goals. And look, he may if he stayed all the season, if he stayed long enough, he'd break all the records. But he's
mm.
going to break every record in terms of quickest to get to X, quickest to get to Y. Even still, but that's 1 goal in 5 games, much to the chagrin of many FPL managers. But
Yeah.
it's the case that they've got some critical players missing. De Bruyne was on the bench, but not even thought fit enough to bring on some minutes. I'm talking about bring on for some minutes, not even for like 5 or 10 minutes. Only Doku made it off the bench, but they're missing critical players now. Are you? They're missing Diaz and Stones also for a few weeks now. They're probably a little fortunate that the international break's going to come to give them a little bit of respite. But you're right, in terms of the next couple of games they've got Brighton, Spurs, and Liverpool, 3 teams that can score and can score and attack at will. So you'd fancy perhaps all 3 to score against Man City. Let's see, time will tell. But you would right now say I fancy all 3 to score against them because I mean Rodri is that important, and then you take away some of the centre backs. The fact that Walker's not been training much and he's not quite the force that he once was, but also once you upset that back line in terms of personnel, he's still not going to be quite the same. I think they've got a couple of a good few questions to answer, and I think these next few weeks could well make or break in terms of where they lie. I mean, yes, they've been there, done it. So even if they fell, in my opinion, 7 points behind, I don't think they'd panic because that's. I think they if I thought Arsenal deserved a bit of benefit of the doubt, Man City definitely do. But yeah, they're not playing consistently enough. And the point is, that you know this, it's a bit like again, if I use the example of cricket. If you look against that incredible Australia team and you just go through and you think, wow, it's Hayden Lang at the top, you've got Ponting, you've got Steve O there afterwards, you've got middle order of like Gilchrist coming in. My point is it's stacked, and then you've got the ballers easily able to. You just look at the lineup and you think, yep, it's going to be hard graft. And it's similar with Manchester City, where you think if Rodri's in that team, all of a sudden you think we're not even going to create many opportunities. Now you're thinking we're probably good for a goal at least against this Man City team. And it comes back to clean sheets. If you don't look like you're going to keep clean sheets, and if teams don't fear you, that's half the battle. And teams right now don't necessarily fear them. I mean, I probably owe my son an apology. I spoke to him on Friday, and he told me Bournemouth were going to win, and I thought these young kids nowadays. But so I laughed him off. So I do apologize to him. But yeah, and they were good value for the win. I mean, look, this manager, Ayub. I mean, look, be fair to me. It wasn't that I was ridiculing him. It was more the fact that they were probably a bit harsh on Gary O'Neill. But he's doing incredibly well. Back-to-back wins at home against Arsenal and Man City. He speaks very well. His team play the right way. Good football, quality football. They had two. Probably should have scored maybe four, maybe even five
Mm,
on another day.
yeah.
And it's very rare that Man City lose but deserve to lose. And I thought that was the case, and Guardiola admitted as much. Again, I think benefit of the doubt. It's a bit of a blip. They're not quite playing well enough. They've got some big injuries. There's no two ways about it. I think they should still be able to navigate through it. I think once De Bruyne is back, that should lift the team a little bit. And I think once they get some consistency at the back, I wouldn't be surprised if they can go on a run. But a tricky run of fixtures right now, especially the timing of it, whilst they're probably scratching around for some form. And I think that game, although it's a little way away, Ayub, at Anfield in 3 games' time in the Premier League, looms large. And I think Liverpool will be hoping that if they can get Man City there with a lead in terms of in the Premier League, they'll feel really confident at home that perhaps they can turn them over.
But isn't this where, I mean, this is where my point is. I mean, he's he's obviously not got all the gun players that he normally had. So as a coach, surely he should adapt the style of play. And also, this is where a good coach instills in his players that when certain players are missing, I mean, you talked about the Australian cricket team. Now, they had an array of riches, but if let's say Shane Warne was injured, Brett Lee would step up to the plate. And this is where a good coach instills in his charges that there are certain players that obviously are the key players, the main players, and you almost play perhaps a supporting role. But when one of those key players is absent, you step up to the plate. And that's, as a coach, that's what you're instilling in your team. You have to adapt tactics when you've not got your best players available. And I don't see any of that, both from Arteta and Guardiola. I mean, we'll go on to Liverpool, where perhaps I'll add something about slot, but certainly from these two coaches, it's almost as if, oh, blimey, our good players are missing. What do we do? It's almost hoping for the best.
Yeah, what's really interesting about the two managers that you mentioned is psychologically, they've both taken very different approaches to their current situations at their clubs. Mikel Arteta spoke about when the injuries were put to him, and I like his mentality. I always have. He said, "Look, it's time to show our teeth. It's time to show what we're about. I'm not going to let any of that seep into the squad." In terms of yes, and of course, internal musings are one thing, but I like the fact that externally he's like, look, no excuses. Get on with it.
I
These are the
agree.
moments. And I like that. Similar Guardiola after the midweek defeat against Spurs in the EFL Cup spoke about, and he's a little cantankerous when they lose, which is fair enough. I mean, I don't have too much of an issue with that. But he was talking about how they've got, people will be happy and they've got very few players of 13 players and all the rest of it.
Mm,
Yeah. So there was a little bit of wallowing, if I may say. And yet he didn't seem to do the trick when it came to the weekend. And perhaps that does seep into the players' mindsets that perhaps, oh, we are missing some big players. Oh,
yeah.
we better be on our best behavior. Now, Man City have been there, done it, won the biggest trophy. So I still think they've got enough to go to Bournemouth and get a win, irrespective. But the fact is, teams have played them well this season for the most part. For the most part, Wolves, Fulham. These are not teams.
Mm.
Fulham are doing okay, but these are not. These are teams that, again, Man City, when they're on their best behavior, will rip them to shreds. So yeah, look, I think there's a question mark now in terms of a little question to answer. Very early days, they won't be panicking anyway, stretch or form, in any way, shape or form. But I think they'll probably want to get De Bruyne back, and they'll probably want to improve those performances because again, I expected them to, especially when they went down to Bournemouth, I expected them to really later on. And it wasn't a surprise when Bournemouth made it 2-0. So question marks for sure. But again, it's a little early to start, writing any obituaries, are you?
Right. We'll complete the trilogy of the top teams. Liverpool, of the three, they won. Again, it looked at one stage that they were going to join this losing trend. Uh, Good performance in the end by Liverpool. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, did you think it was a deserved victory for Liverpool?
This was an incredibly unusual game. It really was. On the basis that the game's about goals, Liverpool deserved to win the game. But I decided to watch this game instead of the Man City game. Here we can watch the UK 3 o'clock games. Again, I've had to endure Andy
On
Gay
a legal stream as well.
on a legal stream, I must say, listening to Andy Gray and Richard Keys. So there are some drawbacks. But anyway, we won't go into that too much.
They are Qatar based, aren't they, them too?
They are indeed, but no. So fortunately, we can win it. And remember, with the 4 hour difference now, Ayub, after the clocks went back, so there's those games kick off at 7 p.m. So it's dark outside, and I'm watching the conventional UK 3 o'clock games. But anyway, I decided to watch the Liverpool game instead of the Man City game, simply because I try and watch Brighton when I can because they are fun. They are a fun team to watch. I've not seen a team play at Anfield there like that in the first half for a long, long time. They were well deserving of their 1-0 win at halftime, 1-0 lead, I should say, at halftime. Played some incredible stuff, really, some really fun stuff. Brighton, I mean, look, ultimately they lost. So I don't want to go gung ho, but the type of football they play is the type of football that, generally speaking, I like watching. It reminds me of Kevin Keegan's Newcastle to some extent, which is that they're a good watch. They play vertical football. They don't knock it around for the sake of knocking it around. I mean, that opportunity they had at 1-0 when Leeds' favourite, I say quote unquote, Ruta went through. I mean, the pass was incredible. But if you watch the build up to that, Ayub, they invited the press in terms of very dangerous territory. But Brighton, being one of the better proponents of it beating the press, played it out so beautifully. And the player then is just in oceans of space in the midfield. Plays a wonderful ball around the side of Van Dijk. And you think Ruta bearing down on goal, you can tell he's a little unsure of himself. Van Dijk eases in, puts him under a little bit of pressure, and Kelleher stays strong. But you thought the first half, Brighton played some incredible stuff. Genuinely, like I would tell anyone to catch some extended highlights in terms of football. That was about as good as it gets. Especially at Anfield, I thought Liverpool were distinctly second best. Yes, they had one or two moments, but Brighton were well worthy for 1-0 lead, if not arguably should have gone in more ahead after Welbeck. But the great thing about Liverpool is they play with the shortest memory that you're ever going to get. And I like that. They play with, this is the only phrase I could think about, they play with a certain, not necessarily just a risk, they play with a reckless abandon, which is why I think some of the ideas that Slots brought a lot more control, I still think is overblown because I've watched the majority of Liverpool games this year and they're still playing with a certain verve and a certain speed. And I thought in the second half, especially with some of the changes that Arne Slot made, again, distinctly second best in the first half. I thought the Brighton coach probably did outmaneuver him in terms of the way they were playing. They really couldn't get to grips with them in any way, shape, or form. But in the second half, they just took a lot more risks. They really made it into a you play, we play. And I thought they just overran Brighton, in a sense, kind of worked them into submission. Right? So a lot of the Brighton players in the second half not being able to get up the pitch, breathing heavily, just finding it a lot harder to put together moves simply because of Liverpool's power and running in the second half. And they play with such a reckless abandon, which I think is needed at times, especially at Anfield, where you want to get the crowd into it. The Brighton coach spoke about it afterwards that, yeah, the atmosphere got wild there. Not sure the players could kind of cope with that. So I think that's part of the plan of Liverpool in terms of the style they play. So let's not, I think there was some talk about, oh, well, I think Slot brought a more refined and more composed kind of approach to Klopp. But this was very much Klopp-esque in the second half. Look, fantastic goals. I think the first one as well, getting men into the box, cross comes in, nobody touches it, goes in, and then the Salah goal again. Just vertical running, get it into Salah one-on-one is as good as it gets, especially if you're getting one-on-one, bearing down on goal against the fullback. As soon as he cut in, I genuinely thought this is going top corner because he's that good. So I thought Liverpool, just in terms of, look, the game's about goals, so therefore they deserved it. I thought Brighton on the whole definitely deserved a draw. But the game's not fair like that. But again, incredible game to watch. Liverpool, I think, look, ultimately, I do think they're going to be right there at the very end. I really do. There were a few, and I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of what was out there on Twitter. There were a few Arsenal fans suggesting that, well, Man City losing is a great deal. I never understand that. I've watched enough of Liverpool over the last 4 or 5 years to know that this is a proper team, and they're putting proper points on the table, on board, I should say. And yes, are they at times in games still found wanting where you think they're a little bit vulnerable? Yes, but they have such a great deal of conviction in their way of playing offensively that they always feel like they'll score. And invariably, they always do. So yes, against Forest, that one blemish this season, but they're well poised, 7 points ahead of Arsenal, a couple of points I think ahead of City. They've got a very good goal difference as well. So I think, look, on the face of it, a big win, especially given the results of the other two, and I think it sets them up nicely now with one game to go before I think they've got Villa next, which could be another difficult game to navigate. You'd still fancy them to come through. I think they beat Villa 3-0 last year at home. So I think if they can head into that international break, top of the table, maybe even Arsenal have lost to Chelsea, which for now takes them out of the conversation. I still think they'll feel confident heading into a couple of games' time where they could go into City. Yes, every game is important, but I think they'll just feel like if they can get Man City at Anfield with Liverpool, I would say comfortably in the lead. I think they'll really fancy perhaps striking a very early blow in terms of and kind of nailing their kind of title aspirations. But yeah, they deserve to win in the end just simply because the game's about goals. But a very watchable game. Would strongly encourage anyone to find some extended highlights because Brighton definitely played their part as well.
Excellent summary. I mean, my thoughts on, or at least the reputation of Slot was that he's one of the best at in-game management. And I think that's really what was demonstrated. We've talked about what I've talked about Arteta and Guardiola, that sometimes I question their coaching abilities when things are not going their way. This was in complete contrast to that because they were certainly second best. And then he's obviously made some wholesale changes. The whole dynamic changed, the whole style of play changed. And in the end, you're absolutely right that maybe perhaps Brighton deserved a draw, but I think certainly from the changes, it became much more Liverpool in the ascendancy. They scored the goal. They looked much more dominant, much more in control. And that's what I expect from a top class coach. That what he's doing is he's got a system that he's set up. If it's not working, what's he going to do to try and change it? And it looked completely. This was something that Slot did, and in the end, the victory was down to Slot and the changes that he made, and the system or the change of system that he introduced. So that's really what I would expect from the other coaches. So I mean, what's your thoughts on his in-game management?
Yeah, it's a fantastic point you make. I really do. I have a couple of points on that. You're absolutely right. He did make some critical changes. He saw that it wasn't quite going right. Brighton were overrunning them, and yes, he made the changes needed. He didn't let it drift too long. Now, on the same day, Arsenal in the first half against Newcastle were very poor, to the extent where I was thinking, even though he never does this, he's probably going to have to make a change at half time because I want to say the season's on the brink here, but I just thought he'd probably think, I'm going to have to bring White on, make one or two changes. White, I thought clearly was just not fit. You could just tell, but I mean, Ben White's normally galloping on that right hand side. He's got a bit of a growing issue, so he did seem a little bit hampered. Um, but you just felt he was going to make some changes. Now, he didn't at half time, so you thought, okay, he's going to give him a short leash in the second half. The second half, first 15 minutes was worse. I mean, the first half was a low bar, but the second half, first 15 minutes from 45 to 60 was an atrocious 15 minutes by Arsenal. It was even worse, which is why I thought even on the 50th minute, you might think, I've seen enough. Right, get on with it. I'm going to make a couple of changes here, even if it's just to send a message to the team. I'm talking about even if it's three changes, you do it just. But I think Arteta sometimes he's quite loyal to his players, rightly or wrongly. Whereas Slot, if you remember in the first game of the season at Europe against Ipswich, even though it was a young player in Kwanzaa, I think it was, he took him off at half
Mm,
time, if you
yeah,
remember.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and it was Slot's first game, and you thought he could have even been a little bit sweet in a press conference or in the post match comments by saying, "Look, he's a young player, no issues. I mean, it's just we wanted to change personnel, blah blah blah, whatever." But he spoke about the fact that he was losing all the jewels. We bought Ibrahim Konate on, who was winning all, and I remember at the time thinking. It's very interesting that he's got enough conviction about himself in the first game away from home in the Premier League,
Mm,
where he's going to be nervous himself. I mean, look, he's managing Liverpool Football Club, first Premier League game, but he's sure enough about his conviction where he makes that change. And I remember thinking then, he's sure of himself. I like that in any manager. No indecision. If something's going wrong, change it.
mm,
So I think he does deserve credit. I think that has definitely that kind of perhaps decisive hand, let's say, has kept the squad on edge. I mean, it's a bit like how he's navigated the whole Diaz Gakpo thing on that side. Diaz started the season on fire. Gakpo also was. doing really well internationally. Had a good kind of summer tournament, but was doing really well. But you bought him. He kind of was bringing him off the bench.
Mm.
Then he said, "Right, Diaz looks a little bit." He tried to bring Gakpo in for some of the games, so he's been happy to chop and change and use, so to speak, the hot hand. So I think it's just a case of that. You saw Nunes start up front this week, showed some nice touches. He obviously got the start against Arsenal, got the assist. So right now he's just playing the right hands at the right time. Again, Forest is the one blemish where he'll really want to have that game back. Again, I thought in the end Forest probably did enough, especially in that second half. But I think you make a fair assessment of Slot in terms of him being decisive, him being able to decipher what's needed. Yes, they rode their luck in the first half, but Brighton can do that even to good
Mm.
teams.
Hmm.
But in the second half, their power, their speed, their risk, I felt, and their kind of decisiveness in how they want to try and get about getting in amongst them, won them the game. So absolutely, I don't disagree with you whatsoever. And perhaps that could be what ultimately tilts the Premier League in their favour, because I think having a manager on the sideline, sure of himself, sure of his ways, knowing what changes to make, what needs addressing quickly, and not letting the game drift, is a big quality to have.
Absolutely. And I think we talk about key players missing for Liverpool. Jota is huge. I mean, I think he's I think he's not underestimated by the Premier League or fans of other teams, but I think people don't appreciate or understand how good a player he is, how smart a player he is, how intelligent he is, and he's a huge loss to this Liverpool side. But Slot again, this is the difference. I think that he's accepted the fact that obviously he's got a player who's key to his sort of the way that he wants to play. But he's trying to obviously make sure that, right, okay, he's missing, so I need to adapt. And that is the difference between a really, really good coach. He doesn't always get it right at the start of the game, but certainly I think in game management, I think there's nobody better. Certainly in it's a small sample size, but certainly in the 12 or 13 games, he's impressed me very much.
They've been the
Right,
best.
okay.
They've been the best team in the league, and they
Yeah,
deserve to sit on top.
yeah, not by a country mile. I think it's been a, a sort of bitty type of Premier League thus far. I don't think anybody's really been that dominant. Even though Liverpool obviously have had a great deal of success, it's nobody's been absolutely outstanding, but it's the usual suspects at the top of the table. So obviously it shows that these teams are doing something right.
Yeah.
Right. Before we go, we've got to comment on obviously the Man United Chelsea game. We've obviously talked about uh, Ten Hag being sacked, new man sort of coming in a few weeks' time. So what did you think of the performance? I mean, it was an okay sort of game. Uh, Sutton?
Yeah, I mean, if from my perspective, the difficulty for me was that I don't know if you follow the Brazilian Grand Prix, but because of all the rain during qualifying and all the rest of it, qualifying had to be pushed to Sunday. The race got brought forward early. Then the race was getting red flagged. It was the most eventful Formula One race that I've watched. So I decided to prioritize that in amongst whilst trying to also watch a little bit of Chelsea, Man United at Old Trafford. But I caught the majority of the game. I mean, look, it was a very unusual game, wasn't it, Ayub? I mean, I did call it a draw, so I'll just leave
Oh,
that
you did, yeah, yeah,
there.
yeah. I
I'll
said to
just
people at
leave that.
Chelsea.
Of course you did, because you said Chelsea are back last year, I think, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. Look, I mean, the game was a very unusual one. It wasn't of necessarily the highest quality, but what was, I mean, Chelsea will be. I mean, Manchester United had opportunities, Chelsea had opportunities, but the game was very unusual in the sense of it looked like both teams could score with a little bit of extra quality. I mean, the midfield at times was completely open. Midfielders with lots of space to navigate and kind of run into. I felt if Chelsea were a little bit sure of themselves, they probably would have been able to pick United off. Again, United had some good moments, especially in the first half, and there were a couple of occasions when Hoyland didn't release the ball quickly enough into Garnacho once, really causing the Argentinian quite some frustration. But there were some moments where you thought both teams, you can see Chelsea in terms of some of the potential, but you could also see why perhaps they're not quite there yet in terms of
Mm.
they left themselves exposed at times 2-on-2, 3-on-3, relying on the brilliance of a Fofana or Colwill to bail them out of trouble. So you saw a little bit of that, and then you saw again second half as it progressed. You saw maybe Palmer getting into the game a little bit more, but yeah, the game needed a goal. It got one obviously with the penalty. Sanchez is just, I mean, he's a goalkeeper I want to try and put my arms around, but I just can't. He just makes one too many poor decisions. Obviously, last year I remember against Arsenal, he played the ball to Rice. Rice pings it into an empty net. This year he started shakily. If you think about, in a sense, against uh, Liverpool as well, not being strong enough against Curtis Jones. If you remember against who was it? I think it was against Rutter, right? Brighton. If
Mm,
you
yeah,
remember
yeah.
when he made two mistakes in that game, causing so he's a goalkeeper that Chelsea are going to give a very short leash to. He's just making too many mistakes. I mean, the ball's going away from goal. Stay upright. Stay upright. Nothing bad's going to happen if you stay upright. So yeah, I think from that perspective, incredible equalizer. Moses Caicedo, who I've been a big fan of over the last couple of weeks. I thought he played incredible against Liverpool. I thought he was incredible again yesterday. He's really now coming to the fore. The best bit about that goal is the fact that he has to steady himself, readjust his feet, and then absolutely pings. I'm glad Mudryk didn't get a touch on it. Probably would have deviated the ball away from goal, but incredible equalizer. And in the end, I thought a draw was the fair result. I don't think either did enough, perhaps, to warrant the 3 points. But in a game that was a bit unusual in the sense of it wasn't a cagey affair. It was just a poor affair. I mean, you thought there's lots
Mm.
of potential for goals. It wasn't like both teams were defending incredibly well. It felt a lot of last ditch stuff, a lot of missed opportunities. You think back to Jackson when he kind of nearly slips, gives it to Fernandez. You think put it away, misses. So lots of near misses, I would say. So an unusual game, uh, perhaps reminiscent of perhaps where both teams are. Chelsea, perhaps slightly the more assured, but still not enough in terms of that final bit of quality. And Man United still is their worst start in what since 1986 or something along those lines. At Ayub, they get their new manager soon. I think that's the last Premier League game. I think I'm not sure. Actually, no. I think Leicester. I think Ruud van Nistelrooy will still
Yeah.
take the Leicester game. But he'll be there in situ there afterwards. Time will tell if he'll keep Ruud van Nistelrooy. But from a United perspective, was there cause for optimism? Not really. But at least they didn't lose the game. So they're still in the doldrums. They'll be hoping that they can beat Leicester, and then the new manager comes in. Hopefully, they can start making their way up the table. So time will tell. But an unusual game, if you ask me.
You're right. I mean, it was a disappointing game because uh, certainly from Chelsea's point of view, I thought that. I mean, I predicted, and I was quite confident that it will be because United are sort of faltering, even though they had that sort of victory that yeah, in the cup. But I just sort of felt that Chelsea would have too much, even though they're still not the. I mean, they're nowhere near the finished article. But I just thought they'd have a little bit too much quality, and I think it will be Chelsea certainly will be thinking it's an opportunity miss because they were there for the taking. They're not sound. There's lots of holes in the Man United team, and Chelsea just didn't exploit it. Simple as that. So, uh, in the end, a fair result, but that's only a fair result because it was sort of two teams that didn't perform well, and none of them really deserved a victory. Uh, and it will be interesting to see what happens because when we talked about it before it was confirmed, that I was hoping or I was thinking that perhaps this new coach will come in for next season, which allows Man United as a club to sort the problems out because it has got problems. It's got players that really shouldn't be there, and there's perhaps sort of off the field things that need to be resolved as well. So it's going to be again an interesting time to see what happens when this new coach comes in. Is he going to have an impact, or is he going to have the same problems that all these other coaches have had? There's too many other issues that need to be resolved because before he can concentrate on just the playing aspect of it. But time will tell. Right, that's we've been going for about an hour or so, so it we don't want to bore our audience to tears. But before we go, I'm going to mention Leeds.
Oh yeah, I mean the floor's yours. The floor's. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean to be honest with you, I thought to myself, oh, I wonder how they're getting along. And then I checked the score, and I was like 3-0, 30 minutes. I said that'll do a you nicely. So
Yeah, it
tell us
was.
a
I
bit
mean,
about it.
it was as comfortable as they get. I mean, I think Wayne Rooney was more concerned about there's two more games that they've got before the international break, which is perhaps more must win for them. So he's concentrating on those games because, by all accounts, he played an ordinary side. I mean, they're an ordinary side to start off with, so this was super ordinary.
I,
They registered no shots on goal,
I was I was
so
I was gonna say just very quickly. I don't want to take your shine away because it was a big win for Leeds. I mean, they've joint goal difference now. I think with Sheffield United, albeit a few points behind, but the goal difference matters. I think if they can start separating the goal difference, that could mean a position. comment of the season. Look, Leeds are doing well. 7 wins now out of 13, is it? But just very quickly, you again, just don't want to take your shine away, but Plymouth are in the bottom three, right? Or at
Yeah,
least they started the game in the bottom three, so they must still be there after another -3 goal difference and 0 points. We remember what happened to Rooney at Birmingham. Do you think he's gonna get a long leash at Plymouth, or do you think this could, if results, and it's still early. If results don't start to turn, do you think he could also be looking perhaps at another could he be another managerial casualty of the championship? What do you think?
it will be sad if that is the case because they've had some decent results. I mean, they've beaten Sunderland, who are top of the table, and they've played decent football. I think perhaps what they're waiting for is maybe the January window, get a few additions. Uh, I hope for Rooney's sake. I mean, I think their objective, and listening to or reading the comments from a lot of the Plymouth fans, is just to stay in the league. I think this season is just to stay in the league. So as long as he finishes sort of fourth bottom, or even if they finish fourth bottom, that will be to a certain extent a success. Uh, I want him to do well. I really want him to do well. And there have been times where they've played outstanding football. They have got some decent players. So I want him to do well because, and I've said this to other people as well, that it would be so easy for Rooney just to to do punditry, to have the easy option. He's decided after all, I mean, all the success that he's accomplished, he's decided to give something back. Because I always sort of think that great players, when they go into management, is about giving something back. It may be obviously personal as well, where he wants to obviously test himself, but he's shown enough in certain games that they play decent football. They've had some decent results. I mean, the game against Preston the week before was exactly the same, 3-0 down, but they came back and they could have actually won the game. So it's not all doom and gloom. It doesn't look great, but I think he's probably thought of Leeds is going to be, it's not going to be a result that they're going to get. So therefore concentrate on games where they really should be getting something. So these next two games perhaps will be quite key, but I hope they don't get rid of him.
I'm not sure you can look at it that way. You told me they've beaten Sunderland. I don't think you can just give up on games in the championship. I mean, I mean, look, listen, Leeds might be a good team. I'm pulling your leg, but they're not at the level where you just say, "Well, we'll forfeit that one." So,
Well, no. I think in the championship we are, but I mean, he didn't forfeit because he had six-member. I mean, he was playing with a six-man defence. It was he.
where
His
were they?
objective was well for about 30 odd minutes they kept us out, and then I think when we scored a goal, that's when he was bereft of ideas. He didn't know what to do, so we scored about three goals. In the second half, they were a little bit more offensive, but to not have one shot on goal. It's quite embarrassing. But as I said, if he gets 4 points from the next two games, then he'll be vindicated in what he's done. But enough with Wayne Rooney and Plymouth. I think we've
Yeah,
gone
let's.
on long
Yeah,
enough. So
yeah. Manage your
let's
manager.
call it a day.
Your manager's doing well, though. You. Let's be very clear.
Don't even go there. Don't even go there. But on that note, let's call it a day. So as always, thank you so much for watching. And until the next time, have a nice evening. See you later. Ta-da.